From the studios of All Classical Portland in Oregon, this is The Score, the weekly celebration of music in the movies. I'm Edmund Stone.
I would say silence is one of the most powerful tools that you have as a composer. Where to stop music and where to bring it back in.
From creating the new theme to Wonder Woman, to working with Hans Zimmer on Batman v Superman, composing music for Mad Max, Fury Road, and Deadpool, he's covered a lot of ground. And this week, he's my guest on The Score. Join me for a conversation with Tom Holkenborg. Tom Holkenborg, welcome to The Score.
Great to be here.
Tom, I'd like to talk a little bit about The Distance Between Dreams, which you composed in 2016 to cover the Hawaiian surfer Ian Walsh. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really great thing to do, and it was wonderfully shot. And I actually did some research, and a lot of these surfer guys that do these extreme waves, they all love listening to electronic music. So I wanted to create something that feels like home for them. And I was in touch with Red Bull, who made the documentary a lot about these guys and what they like to listen to. And obviously that was probably the reason why they asked me in the first place, because I have that electronic background. So it was really nice to make a full electronic score, also very ambient, with a lot of arpeggios. And what's the funny thing about that score is that I actually made it with all my classic synths here in my room running live at the same time. And so it's not done with modern technology, it's all done with technology from, let's say, the half 70s till the early 90s.
Wavy Waters, part of the electronic score to Distance Between Dreams, composed in 2016 by Tom Holkenborg. Tom Holkenborg, welcome to the score.
Great to be here.
To many, you are known as Junkie XL or Junkie JXL, and sometimes by your birth name, Tom Holkenborg. Do you have a preference when you're scoring movies?
Obviously, I was born as Tom. I started using the moniker name Junkie XL since in the 90s when I started producing electronic music. And funny enough, in 2002, I did a remix for Elvis Presley. And then when the lawyers of the estate found out that my name was Junkie XL, they almost had a heart attack. So they asked me to change it to JXL. And when I started scoring films, at first it was Junkie XL, and then we kind of just phasing it out into Tom Holkenborg.
Today on the score, my guest is Tom Holkenborg. Tom, let me ask you about your video game scores. These include sports subjects, Madden NFL 16, Need for Speed, and the sci-fi game Dark Spore. You have been creating music for video games for over 20 years now, and the technology for games has changed so much in that time. Because of multiple choice options, how do you approach scoring video games?
Well, video games are a vertical experience, so to say. A movie is a horizontal, linear experience. You watch the film from beginning to end, and the structure is set, and you could really think about an arc, how to develop the music throughout 2 hours or so. Video games is completely different. It completely depends on how the player is playing the game. And therefore, the music needs to change as you playing the game. And this brings up a bunch of different challenges for a composer. You need to think in a more modular form, whether it's in dynamic, whether you can quickly switch to a higher form of dynamic or a more dramatic form of that same piece of music that you're in. And sometimes you need to switch to something completely different. So you need to create a piece of music where you're able to switch back and forth seamlessly without hearing any weird interruptions. As a game composer, it's a surplus if you know a lot about what they call audio engines. These are the actual software programs within the video game that will handle the music. So the more you know about those software programs, the more you can make your music be extremely valuable to the game and to the player.
Can you give me an example of this, perhaps one of the cues from Dark Spore?
Yeah, I can talk about Dark Spore. We did something interesting there. I delivered a form of music, let's say when you start playing the game and everything is like still open, you have no idea whether you're going this way or that way. The music starts with a certain intention. And that piece of music that was delivered with multiple channels at the same time, and each channel would be a more intense version of that piece of music, but the arrangement would be the same. Think of it, if we take a classical piece, the Fifth Symphony of Beethoven, that you have 5 faders that you can move up and down, and the first fader is the piano version of that theme, and then the second fader goes up and you add strings and brass to it, and the third fader goes up and you add percussion to it. At any time, you could determine whether that arrangement sounds at its fullest, more dramatic, or whether it sounds super quiet and maybe a little tense. So you start there, and then when something happens in the game, for instance, you enter a certain room and you enter a few opponents that you need to fight, we then switch to a completely different composition that also contains out of 5 different layers. And in order to do that very smoothly, we first go to a transition piece of music. So the computer knows that, oh, the player is entering a new room. He's going to face 3 opponents. Let's switch to this piece of music first for maybe a few seconds, and then we go into this new piece. So this transition piece of music will allow a very smooth transition from the music that you were into the new piece of music that you're going to. So this is like a small example, like how complicated this can be for a complete game.
On the FIFA video games, which run on PlayStation and Xbox, what is the requirement for that video game score?
The Dark Spore score is more like Blade Runner-ish. mixed with Pink Floyd, if you will, and it's very ambient and it's very trippy. Whereas the FIFA score is very direct. It's more also an alternative score. It has guitars in it, but also drum computers and synthesizers. So it's a mixed up bag, if you will.
Some of the music that my guest Tom Holkenborg scored for the FIFA video games. Today on The Score, I'm talking to the Dutch composer Tom Holkenborg. Tom, just before we leave the video game subject, you talked about the complexity. When you're doing a video game, which you've done for many years now, versus feature film, is a feature film like a palate cleanser to you in as much as it is more linear, more straightforward?
Yes, it totally is. A movie is great because it's a horizontal experience. The story is there, the chapters are there, the characters are there. So it's always very interesting to really dive into what the deeper story is behind the film with the director and have elaborate conversations, what the movie is about, what the characters are about, and what the director is trying to convey to the audience. And then you talk about musical concepts and you try different themes for different characters. And it's a completely different experience than the video game experience. Also, in the video game world, you usually work with a team of creatives that all have musical feedback to you. They all have different ideas what to achieve with the video game. And the process in making music for a video game is usually shorter than for a film. But in general, I would say you have anywhere between 3 to 6 months to work on a film and just really get to know the director really well. And the director will be at first the only person that you talk to develop a specific style and a specific roadmap for that movie. It's a more one-on-one experience, whereas with video games, you're dealing with a team of creative people.
Tom, let's turn now to some of your bigger movies. And by bigger, I'm not necessarily talking about the budgets, which of course may apply to superhero films, but the huge expanse of the canvas that you're working with.
This creature, seems to feed on energy.
This thing is from another world. My world.
I've killed things from other worlds before.
She with you?
I thought she was with you.
We first heard your Wonder Woman theme in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice in 2016, and this appears again in the Wonder Woman movie of 2017. Wonder Woman is becoming such an inspiration. Did you approach her theme with preconceptions from the early DC comics, or her character in current films, or possibly focusing on the role model in our present society?
Well, what was interesting for me is that I was at Comic-Con last year and I got this question completely out of the blue from one of the people who attended that forum there. It was a woman, maybe like 21 years old, 22 years old, and she asked me, "You've been scoring a lot of movies with female heroines. Do you approach writing music for a female heroine different than for a male hero character?" And it was really interesting. I never really thought about that. And I did Divergent, which had a female heroine character. I did 300 Rise of an Empire, who had a very bad female heroine character who eventually dies. And then Hans and I together worked on Wonder Woman. And obviously Mad Max Fury Road with Fury Rosa. So all these movies have really strong female characters that are very important in the outcome of what happens in the storyline on screen. It's funny that when you work on music for these characters, you don't necessarily think about it that much. It just needs to be powerful and it needs to be great that fits with that person that you see on screen. And it also depends on if there are movies coming after that with that same actor or actress. That is a tough one to crack. On one hand, I would say the only way to approach a theme for a character truthfully is that you keep that really close to yourself. For me, it's very hard to analyze not only what other composers have done in the past, or not only how heroines were portrayed in the comics like many, many years ago. I just have to deal with this picture that is at hand. And the only thing I can do is really try to absorb these characters and come up with music that I feel is closely related to them. And obviously, you know, in the future, 100 years from now, there would still be another movie being made with any of those heroes or heroines that we see right now on screen. And somebody at that point in time will have a different crack at it and a different opinion how to approach these characters. And sometimes it's also true when you work on one film, and I think that was very much the case with Batman vs. Superman with my friend Hans Zimmer. It's like, let's just stay focused on getting this film done, you know, and then we'll see what happens after this. And obviously, you hope that you plant the seeds that then in later movies can grow out to be proper trees with great branches and great leaves, and it goes into all these different territories.
Is She With You on the soundtrack of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice in 2016, and the first time we hear the new Wonder Woman theme, which was composed by my guest today on the score, Tom Holkenborg. Tom, you worked on that score with your friend Hans Zimmer. When you collaborate, is it a given that you'll both go away and do your own pieces and then come back and merge the ideas? Do you work independently, or is it a full collaboration?
It's a complicated answer. I do like to point out, when I came to LA almost 15 years ago and I wanted to become a film composer, I went through a really long road of assisting other composers and to see how they did things and to learn the craft of this profession. And in that sense, I have worked with Harry Gregson Williams and with Klaus Badelt, and later on also a few movies with Hans. And then we got to a point where I started my own career, and Hans really wanted to collaborate with me on Batman vs. Superman. And I think that was the first occasion where we worked, so to speak, not only as friends but also as equals, and we both had an important input in that process. Now, Hans and I like to work on a movie like this in various different capacities. So yes, we do go on our own and just do our own thing, so we get together and we play these things. We also like to jam together, like whether I play the bass guitar or a guitar and he plays the piano, and we're just going to play together until we find something that really clicks. We also take turns at the keyboard by playing on a string patch to play ideas, and then we work in each other's sequences. So for the listeners that are not aware, nowadays most composers will work on a computer to map out something that later will then be recorded by a full orchestra, but nowadays we have the capacity to play a director almost a full finished score product that almost sounds like the real deal. And therefore, we take turns behind the computer. It's like, oh, what if we did this, or what if we did that? So I would like to say that the collaboration with Hans, and I think a lot has to do with the fact that we are friends, was very much involved on all areas that you could potentially think of.
Today on The Score, it's my pleasure to welcome Tom Holkenborg as our guest composer. Tom, as Junkie XL, you compose music for 300, Rise of the Empire, a follow-up to 300, with both films depicting historical conflicts between the Spartans and Persians. What do you remember about your work on 300, Rise of the Empire?
It was really great, and it was a storm, so to speak. It was like what the movie is. 4 weeks before the deadline, I got approached by Zack Snyder, who I've already met on the movie Man of Steel. They tried different things with music, and it didn't quite work out. So he asked me to take on that job with only 4 weeks left. And that would be my first Hollywood film to do on my own, which was very daunting, but I was also very ready for it. And I remember it was a crazy month of 18, 20-hour days, coming up with all these ideas for what we could do with the music. And it was an extremely creative month where there was a lot of pressure to deliver, but also I felt very free in my element to be in that position and to deliver the score that Zack was really looking for.
You offered freedom without consequence or responsibility.
Are you accepting my offer?
My answer is still no.
I have to ask you this obvious question, but perhaps it's not such an obvious answer. Are you, Tom Holkenborg, a composer who likes to work to strict deadlines, or do you do better work, do you feel, if you have the freedom to experiment and try over time?
This goes both ways, and you can't have it both. So on one hand, doing something in 4 weeks is extremely stressful. And on the other hand, it really shows you what you're made of and what you're capable to do. And at the same time, I love the long process too. With George Miller, I worked, I think, for over 16 or 17 months on Mad Max. Not non-stop, but with slight little intervals. But nevertheless, it was a really long process with a lot of experimentation. And yes, that is really nice to have that time and really try stuff. And sometimes it's really great when you get brought in. It's like, okay, we got 4 weeks left. How we're going to do this? How we're going to solve this? And that is a great experiment too. So I would say I would not like to do 12 movies a year that with a 4-week time period, because it's definitely not healthy for your body and for your mind to keep doing that continuously. But every now and then I really get a kick out of it when an option like that is being offered to me.
Tom Holkenborg, I understand Your work on 300 Rise of the Empire led directly to your scoring of Mad Max Fury Road. This is a great score, by the way, and a lot of people felt you were shortchanged by not being considered for an Academy Award for that score. It's really good.
Thank you for the compliment, but I'm actually very happy that I didn't get a nomination for the Academy. I'll tell you why. It's something you want to look forward to for a longer period of time, and Mad Max was like movie number 4, number 5 that I scored on my own, and it would feel too much if I would get a nomination for that. I'd love to have something like that maybe in 10 or 20 years from now, so I'm very happy it didn't happen to me this earlier on in the career.
So you're saying that it's the body of work that someone like you should be acknowledged for, not specifically a title of an album?
That's how I would put it. And nevertheless, I am extremely proud on what George and I achieved on Mad Max. I really am. But I've noticed this from my career as a producer and artist, that having certain types of awards so early on in your career can also damage something. And the point that I'm trying to make is like, where do you go from there? Everything after that seems almost like a disappointment.
Look, it'll be a hard day, but I guarantee you that 160 days ride that way, there's nothing but salt. At least that way, you know, we might be able to, together, come across some kind of redemption.
A little of the music that Tom Holkenborg composed for Mad Max Fury Road in 2015. Still to come, Tom Holkenborg talks about his music for the science fiction western horror film Dark Tower, and I'll ask him what it was like composing for the comedy superhero film Deadpool. We'd love to hear your feedback. My email address is edmund, that's EDMUND, @thescore.org. Production of The Score is made possible by Bob's Red Mill, a purveyor to the world of stone-ground, natural, organic and gluten-free whole grain foods for every meal of the day. Information at bobsredmill.com. My guest on the score is Tom Holkenborg, aka Junkie XL. I want to talk now about a different superhero movie, Deadpool from 2016. It seemed to be the perfect combination of movie and composer. The character is obviously having fun on screen, a very different brand of Marvel superhero. Were you tempted to go along with this line of thinking of humor rather than the more traditional composing against the theme?
Yeah, it was very clear when I saw the movie with the director and with Ryan Reynolds. We were sitting in the same room, we watched it, and they used very traditional music as the temp music. And it was so clear for all of us that was not the way to go. And from that point on, we had to walk this really fine line, because what was clear that we needed music that was fun, but we didn't need music that was funny. It's a very small distinct. Like, there are great comedy scores. On top of what you see, the music is also funny. And the idea is to make music that makes the scene fun, but not funny. So we just had to walk that really fine line between that. And I did a few different experiments. One of the things that I experimented with that didn't end up in the film was to do a complete spoof of Ennio Morricone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, with the church bell, the organ, and the whistling, and the guitar. And it was so hilarious. We almost fell off the couch laughing when we saw it to picture, but it was too funny. It was steering you too much in the direction that you needed to laugh when you needed to find this character funny. And what we tried after that, and that was what eventually ended up in the film, was to do a score style that was very much based on certain movies and TV series and artists in the 80s. For instance, Miami Vice, or an artist like Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And what happened with that combination, because that music was, back in the day when it was made, it was so serious and it was meant to be taken serious. And when we used that against the picture, it worked very successful. And so we stuck with that style, even though it was a massive shock for the studio when they heard the first experiments that we were working on, because they were totally not expecting it. And throughout the process, they were completely supportive of it. And obviously the film did really well, so it worked.
Wait! You may be wondering why the red suit. Well, that's so bad guys can't see me bleed.
a soundtrack cue called Watership Down from the Marvel superhero movie of 2016, Deadpool, composed by my guest today on the score, Tom Holkenborg. Tom, if you will, take us through your process when you begin a new film scoring project.
That's always a scary bit. And I think everybody that makes music or writes books or makes a painting, any form of art really, is that you sit in front of your canvas with your paint in all the colors and you've got all the materials to make it. And then to realize that every classic great painting ever made in the last 500 years started with that exactly same moment, like you, just sitting there. It's the same with the piano. You sit behind the piano and then realize that all the classical masterworks ever written on the planet were just written on these 88 keys that you see right in front of you. And that is always a daunting experiment. And I'll tell you, when I see a movie for the first time, I always walk away like very, very nervous and very insecure, is that I need to come up with something for this movie. And then slowly it starts to work in my head and I start to create ideas in my head. And this is different how I used to work. In the past, I would sit immediately behind the piano or guitar or bass guitar and do something. Now I tend to take a step back, think about it, and just like brew for a little bit in my head.
Do you like to start with a group of themes, a suite, if you will, similar to what Hans Zimmer does to present the outline of where a movie score may go for a particular project?
Once I get ideas, I start working on a sketchbook, so to speak. And I make this suite of different ideas for a theme and different iterations of that theme. And then I put it against picture and I see how it works with the scene and if it works on different spots. And usually that's when I get the director in and I say, I think I found something that is what your movie is all about. And you can only do this after multiple conversations with the director, that he explains to you in very clear terms what he's looking for. Generally, a director will never say to you, oh, you need to write something like this or write something like that, but he wants to convey to you if he wants to hear aggression, if he wants to hear heroism, does he want to hear sadness, does he want to hear insecure in the theme or darkness. So these are very important conversations that you take with you when you start working on your first sketch, and then you try it to different scenes, and step by step the movie starts taking shape. And I usually attack the most important scenes first, and then I see what the gaps are that we still need, and then we start coloring the gaps, and therefore you keep maintenance of the arc of the score really well. I've never been a composer that starts at the beginning of the movie and starts writing till the end. I usually start on the most important scene of the movie. Then I know where I need to grow to as far as an arc, in tension, in building, but also in orchestration.
What are you looking for specifically when you start a new film scoring project? Is there something within the tapestry of the movie that will become a hook for you and which you will build your themes around?
Yeah, it makes so much sense to do that. I have super high regards and respect for people that have a different way of working. So for superhero movies, that is usually the third act, where the most important scene is, where it's like the final battle or something. But there are other movies like Black Mass with Johnny Depp, directed by Scott Cooper, where the most important scene happened actually halfway into the film, where the main character is discovering something about himself and about people around him, and that seemed to be the most important scene. So it really varies per film what the most important scene is. And there are also movies, for instance Star Wars, where the introduction of the story and the introduction of the theme is almost like immediately the most important part of the movie to get right.
That's music from Black Mass, composed in 2015 by my guest today on the score, Tom Holkenborg. Tom, let's talk about that creative process a little bit further now. You've created a score, you brought the director in, you figured out where the holes are that need to be filled and the colours that need to be fleshed out, but then the producer has to approve the score. Is that daunting for you to have done all this work and then suddenly have to confront somebody with a checkbook, let's say, who says, yeah, this is okay, or no, I'm not so sure I like this? Where do you go with that?
Well, that's just the nature of the beast. I've been very aware of that this is the case. And this is, to some extent, not all that different from the 25 years when I was an electronic artist, producer, and remixer. Like, I would remix really big stars like Madonna, Coldplay, Michael Jackson. You know, you would make a remix and then I would be very happy with it and the record company would be very happy with it. But then it would go to the artist and sometimes they would say, I feel we need to do this, or I don't like it, or can we do something else? I want to hear more of my vocal. So I've dealt with that for many, many years. And since I got into film scoring and since I had proper training by all these composers I mentioned earlier, you're so aware of that this might happen. When you feel you're completely on the right track with the director, and then you play it to the studio with the producers and they have notes too. And sometimes these notes are small. And sometimes it can mean that you completely have to start over. These are things you have to deal with as a composer every day, and it's not necessarily what you would like, but it's part of our profession. And funny enough, in a lot of cases, I would like to say that it eventually ended up being a better score because of it. And I've noticed that over and over again, and that's why I admire the teamwork so much in this. And I think a lot of people that are new to this industry but do like listening to film scores are sometimes surprised by what the process really is. There's still an idea that the film composer sits on his own behind the piano and comes up with all these genius ideas and that's the end of it. And people sometimes tend to forget that it's a very close relationship that the composer has with the director, and then on top of that with the studio and the producers that are all extremely important in creating the final version of the film with all its glory. And that includes the sound effects, that includes the mix, that includes the actors. So everybody always has a very important say on every aspect of the film. Obviously, always primarily driven by the director, but the studio and producers are always very important in the end result.
2017 for you, Tom Holkenborg, an enormous year from the point of view of scoring. Let's start with Brimstone, the thriller starring Dakota Fanning and Guy Pearce.
Yeah, for me, a very personal film. It has to do with the fact that I know this director for a long time. He had idea for a script already 8 years ago, and we met to talk about it. And eventually, he started shooting the film, and he was ready for me to make music. It was, for me, a really great experience to get into traditional string writing, which is always great if you have that opportunity as a composer, because this director loves very lush string writing with strong melodies. The sound effects are not really big in this movie. It's a lot of dialogue and a lot of quiet scenes where you just see all kinds of things happening. And the music is really a way to convey extra emotion and extra storytelling. So it's almost like a dream come true for almost any composer to work on a movie like this. And it's a great study object too. As a composer, you're always hungry for delving into the great classical archives that we have for hundreds of years. And this was an opportunity for me to really study and dissect the Passacaglia and Fugue in C minor by Bach, which is one of his masterpieces written on organ, and then wonderful orchestrations done by Stokowski in the 30s and 40s. And I wanted to write a score that was very much based on that type of lush tone. And it was a great study object to really dive into theory of it and how Bach masterfully crafted this piece of music, probably in an hour and a half at the kitchen table, because that's how brilliant he was.
That's part of the music from Brimstone from 2017, which is composed by my guest today on the score, Tom Holkenborg. Speaking of 2017, Tom, Dark Tower, a science fantasy western horror film. There's a lot of genres in that statement alone. Science fantasy western horror film. This is a Stephen King story that went through a lot of development at the studios and a number of people before you came on board.
Yes, Dark Tower, very interesting project, and a lot of people worked on it until they found, I think, the best creative team to do it with. It's a very exciting film, and really happy to be part of this team.
some of the music to The Dark Tower from 2017. Finally, Tom Holkenborg, what does music do for a film or for a particular scene in a film?
Oh, it can do a lot. It can make a bad movie acceptable. It can make a great movie bad. It can make a great movie better. And it can bring emotion and joy and all kinds of feelings to the listener without them even knowing it. It comes from the music. And I think that's the beauty of it. And that's also what it should be. As an artist, I was on the stage getting the applause of the crowd. And as a film composer, you work behind the screens with a team, and you're completely subjective to making the film great and making the storyline great, making the acting fantastic. Whether that means you write no music at all for certain sections or you do. And I would say silence is one of the most powerful tools that you have as a composer, where to stop music and where to bring it back in. Obviously, this is all in conversation with the director, but this is a very important tool. And I'm very happy to see that more and more people around the world developing a strong interest in film music, and film music more and more starts to have a life outside of the film. More people buy soundtracks, more people are discussing it on weblogs. We have programs like yourself that focus on composers and score music, and I think it's a wonderful development that people are taking an interest in this. It's wonderful.
Tom Holkenborg, it's been such a pleasure, sir, to have you on The Score. Thank you for your time, and well done on your scores, and look forward to many more. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor.
The Score is a production of All Classical Portland. We are community funded and receive support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and Bob's Red Mill, a purveyor to the world of stone ground, natural, organic and gluten-free whole grain foods for every meal of the day. Information at bobsredmill.com. Production assistance is provided by Matt Rogers. Operational support is provided by Jordan Lewis. Our executive producer is Suzanne Nance. For more information about our show, visit us at thescore.org, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook. I'm your producer and host, Edmund Stone. Let's do this again soon.